us, you know, just
and it's
happy glad when we had millions of dollars in the bank and we were able to pay for phase for the original community center with cash.
The undersized numbers.
Hmm?
You have a mortgage, right?
No, not your home.
You know, we did issue a bond for the first communities.
Yep.
We had the cash, but we did not pay it.
That's because we were getting more interest.
we can give you that dollar amount, then the question fundamentally still is, how do you pay, how do you do that?
You're presuming that they're just gonna stay stagnant like this. We didn't expect a stormwater issue at Hobby Lobby. I mean, you have to anticipate that there are gonna be other issues down the line, and that's why we have to have a reserve. Even if you issue debt, there's gotta be some reserve for the city. I mean, we certainly could take on an emergency that we're not prepared for. That's the problem now.
That's
We need
why
more in
I
the reserve.
mentioned for him to look at it with his worst case scenario,
And I think
negative half.
the biggest challenge is, and we talked about this all through the budget process, and that is, or issue debt to pay for it as you go.
So I don't mind debt, but more short-term debts is what I,
Okay.
but that's up to the council. But
Well, it's like your home. You could get a 30-year loan and pay all the
Some debt's good debt, some debt's bad debt. This is more of a cash flow debt, from my understanding. We have to remember that this isn't, from a balance sheet perspective, I know it's not quite as tight as I'm going to make it out to be, but, this is money that we borrowed from a cash flow perspective that we now have a lien against the private property of how much with the gateway, how much you're leaning against the gateway property. For Rock Creek, this is benefits that we've done in private property. We have a lien, which is, in my mind, an asset, even though in technical accounting sense may not be seen the same. And so the spread there isn't that bad. This is a cash flow discussion we're having. Now, the different argument I would have is, if I understand what Prairie Village did this last year, is they took a 6-year bond note, if I remember correctly, for the roads. Do you remember what it was? They borrowed against the future to do something today. In this instance, what we're talking about, the gateway, it's just a cash flow management issue. It's not borrowing from the future citizen's submission to pay for Rock Creek today. And I think there's a huge difference.
If I understand this right, except for our insurance policy, bond, 5 million, or whatever you want to call it, the rest of the debt we have. And so we are just restructuring this under a lower interest rate for a longer period of time. Is that correct?
Rebalancing.
And the only thing we got
No. Lien is the wrong word, but,
Okay, I'm
but
sorry.
no, that's all right.
Okay.
For what you're thinking, we do not have a lien against the gateway property.
No.
What we did is in the development agreement that was negotiated, we said,
Condition
what-
goes with the fishbowl.
That's right.
And
Goes
if
with
the
the
fishbowl doesn't get built, we get the zilch.
that's not true.
Well, of the 14.
We get
We don't
nothing.
get nothing of the 14.
Correct.
If the project doesn't proceed and star bonds are not issued, we don't get
Yeah.
our revenues back through star bonds.
That's
But
right.
what Lawrence is referring to is the fact that you gave extra protection because you created a special benefit district around the gateway site
Well, I agree.
so that if the star bonds never happened, those same public improvements would be repaid through that special benefit district, similar to what you were
Correct,
talking about
but
earlier.
we don't know yet what, because
So there are
it's gotta
two.
be something started. He says he's
That's
gonna build.
right. So
Until that happens,
So
we'll
this
get
debt
that.
reserve really that we're talking about is,
Yeah.
we have those protections out there. You have two options for
We
repaying.
did that.
So now we're looking at how do we manage and cash flow and continue to do other projects until we know which is the appropriate repayment method from the public improvements made at the gateway site. And there are two ways to skin that cat.
I agree, it's there, but we can't count on that.
We can.
Make a lot of sense. I personally would like a little more time to think about it. I would like to see some alternate schedules. But 1A is a cash flow deal, and it makes a lot of sense. It's just getting the right numbers for the city. 1B is a different concept, a different animal, and so then you'll go and see what the
Right, 1A and 1B are both, you're right, they're a little bit different animals, they're both cash flow
provisions in the stimulus bill, there's a financing mechanism called recovery zone bonds that cities can use to finance infrastructure like Knoll Avenue. It's a little bit different than a normal, traditional tax-exempt bond, but it's still a general obligation bond of the city. Okay, so it's going to look a little different, but it's still a bond that you're going to issue for this project and back with your GO pledge. What's unique about it is you pay taxable interest rates on it instead of tax exempt. So it's a higher interest rate, right? But then every 6 months you get a credit back from the federal government for 45% of the interest that you pay. So if you have a bond that has a 3% interest rate on it, a taxable interest rate of 3%, you get back 45% of that 3% that you pay on the bond, so your net rate is actually 1.65% with this idea of this overall rate. But by no means are you obligated to do this. You could do your normal, quote normal, temporary notes and then tax-exempt long-term bonds. But with these recovery zone bonds, you can't do the temporary note, the long-term bond. You have to go direct to the long-term.
I have a question. on
Yes.
this, Because I'm trying to figure out where we got this, is it 1.8 million? We got error money.
No, not for now, that was for the road project.
So we
Or do
don't,
you have that?
But where does the 5/8 come from? I have the same question. Is that
That's
overseas?
your spreadsheet, yeah, that's a little cheat sheet.
Yes.
So it's way out of there.
Yeah, I thought it was
May I
more a
just-
$3.5 million project.
I'd like to know what it would cost if we just didn't do anything except mill it down.
Well, I'm sorry, I meant to say that up front, that we can change course on this, but right now, the advantage is with these
Because the
recovery zone
interest
bonds.
rate for the recovery zone economic development bonds is significantly lower than the tax exempt GO bonds. Okay.
So, transportation infrastructure improvements. This is right now an opportunity to take advantage of this financing tool that expires at the end of 2010. This recovery zone bond option goes away at the end of 2010. And that's okay if it does, then we would just go back to the quote normal way of issuing tax exempt bonds, just at a marginally higher interest rate.
That's based on 37.5%.
And the $207,000 is 37.5% of 554.
Of
it is what again?
554.
Tell that, say that again
Right,
first.
Lauren? This is 37% of that.
Oh,
To how that agreement was reached.
No, I remember the agreement, so is the Prairie Village contribution 207,891?
Cost within the city of Prairie Village, and then we have the 37.5% from that.
So in other words, is some of the CARS money going to pay
Right. Some of the
Prairie
cars
Village
money going,
costs?
correct.
So Debbie, if you subtract 207 from 554, then that would be,
That is confusion on that chart, to see 554, because 554 is not relevant, except to know, okay.
Village money as well as the city mission. But you're showing us this because this is an instrument that expires at the end of the current calendar year. Given current interest rates, it's a better deal for the city to accelerate this issuance.
Right, and you're probably seeing it maybe a month or 2 months earlier than you would have before.
And that's a good setup. I mean, because again, issue.
right. Now, it would make sense to issue,
Question that Lawrence is asking, 25 or 30 basis points over a 10-year term. I suspect that's a significant savings, but if you put a gun to my head and asked me to quantify that, give you a value, I probably wouldn't even be in the ballpark, right?
I think could change between now and then and not be the best
alternative.
option.
Yeah.
But we will run numbers that are side-by-side comparisons so that you can actually see net interest cost to net interest cost, taxable versus tax exempt, and better weigh what makes sense for the city.
So it behooves us to save
This doesn't feel good to me. This is where, again, I was talking about Prairie Village, we're fixing the road in 2011 on the backs of the next 10 years of taxpayers. Now, I understand from a cash flow perspective, you can't always pay for it the same year you fix it. But, this into the larger picture of paying for transportation funding, the tough discussion that's hit our community this summer, how we're gonna pay for these things. You know, the idea of pushing this out 10 years doesn't sit well with me, let alone 15 personally.
But if you wanted to do the project 10 years from now, I think getting back to Debbie's point, the cost would not be $5.8 million.
Well, correct.
Probably double that.
But that's besides my, no, I agree with you on that.
And all the deterioration that would happen between now and then too. So I don't know how you do the Null Avenue project if you don't have the money to do that.
Well, no, that's what I said. I understand there's a cash flow issue anytime you do capital improvements. I understand that. You can't always pay for it as you go, you know, no matter what the rumors or truths are in this community or in any community. But the idea of pushing these debt payments out even 10 years to me doesn't sit well. And I don't know what other options we have. You know, does this have an early call feature, for instance?
If you could.
It could. You know, I don't know. Because Null Avenue isn't the last road project we need to do. I mean, that's why we're instituting a roads program this next budget cycle. And every program we do, every road we do, we can't have a 10-year debt cycle. Otherwise, we're going to be mortgaging the future forever. We got to make sure we have a way to pay for this stuff. And you know, I'm the one here that's beating the drum the loudest to fix the roads. You know, other than maybe Debbie, you know, who was here before me. So, I mean, I want to fix these roads, but this is just reinforcing to me that the need to make sure we have the money now to fix the roads and not push it back on the next generation. So, that's just my 2 cents worth. I don't know how other council members
Why are
feel.
you talking about, can you just,
Broadmoor, Fox Ridge. I think that would be all the cars eligible roads. And obviously the Metcalfs and Shutton Mission Parkway and I-35, those are KDOT routes.
63rd might qualify.
About
But,
Johnson Drive.
but
Projects. Johnson Drive is broken up into 2 different years, and then we also have a project for Broadmoor. I think I got them all.
63rd
Those are-
Street would also be cars project.
I believe 63rd would also be cars eligible. Yeah, but it's not in the cars program at this point. Yeah.
But here's the, when we started this whole conversation, which is, we're at a historic low of debt interest rates right now, and we're also at a real historic low in terms of construction costs. And so if you're going to make good on the promise to rebuild our infrastructure, while it doesn't feel like a good time to do it, now is in fact the perfect time to do
Yeah,
it.
we agree. And so, you know, some debt financing makes sense because of those historic situations you referred to.
Right.
But if you just take this P&I on the 10-year in front of us, you know, it's basically $500,000 a year for Null. If you compare that back to the conversation we've had all summer on the roads program, you know, we're talking about a $1.5 million program annually in the city. You know, this would eat up a third of that just for one road for the next 10 years.
Right.
And so that's what I don't,
If
if
we-
Mike wants to say something.
It's not 1.5, it's 38 million divided over 10. Because there's 23 million that's,
I'm talking about the local financing component.
yeah, but you think about it in a bigger perspective, because you're looking at, there's only 2 projects that will ever be of this size, and this is one of them, and the second one is Johnson Drive. And when you look at both of those, Martway will have components of it, but parts of Martway have already been done. When I look at the 2 largest ones you'll do something very similar to Johnson Drive. So if I were to say over 5 or 10 years, there's 2 big projects that you're going to take on and you're going to have to debt finance, those are going to be the logical 2. You have concerns about facilities, swimming pools, one I hear about. We need to make sure that we set aside money for our community center as relates to maintaining it. It's a really big investment. We tend to spend somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 sort of maintaining it on an annual basis. But we really need to set aside more money. What was prescribed by the consultant at the time was 2% of the value on an annual basis.